My name is Alex Rushmer. I'm the chef owner here at Vanderlyle Restaurant in Cambridge, UK. Vanderlyle is a vegetable-focused, fine dining, relaxed fine dining restaurant. We use as much local produce as possible, entirely plant-focused, not completely vegan, but we use a little bit of dairy and eggs. But my role as a chef, or I believe my role as a chef, is to showcase as much as possible the amazing variety and flavors that you can achieve using vegetables in the professional kitchen. The menu here at Vanderlyle is a tasting menu. It's a fixed, no choice menu that varies between sort of 9 and 12 courses, depending on the season, depending on the size of the dishes, depending on the produce that we have available. We begin with a selection of small dishes, canapes or snacks, which can be quite intricate actually. And I think a lot of the work that we do for dishes that are so small, they seem to take up a large proportion of the time that we spend on them in the kitchen, because I think those first dishes are incredibly important to starting the menu in a way that is positive and exciting and showing what it's possible to achieve with vegetables. So we begin with some smaller dishes, then we move on to some larger compositions. It follows quite a traditional course through the progression of dishes. So after those we go to the cold larder, so things like salads and colder preparations, and then into a couple of hot dishes, and again showcasing a wide variety. I think we probably have 30 or 40 different vegetables on the menu at any one time, and in the summer that's even more, because we have a salad dish that has sort of at a minimum about 20 elements to it. And then we do a sort of a main course, I suppose, that is probably the best way to describe it. So the menu follows a trajectory that is familiar to a dining audience, but also contains a few surprises, and I think that's important both for the familiarity of it and for the sort of comfort factor, but also for people to be surprised and a little bit confused and amused in certain ways. And then we do 2 desserts. We do one really fresh dessert. The main course is generally quite sort of bold in flavor and full of sort of big umami notes, so we need something that's clean and precise and acidic to follow that, and then something slightly richer, usually fruit based, but in the winter it could be something chocolatey, and then to finish, just a couple of little nibbles to go with coffee. Yeah, so I came to the professional kitchen in quite an unusual route, I suppose. I graduated with a degree in social and political sciences. And then I sort of floundered around. I didn't know really what I wanted to do, and by the time I came out of university 21, 22, still had no idea really what I wanted to do. Thought I should work in the field in which I studied, so I tried to get a job in politics, and it didn't float my boat at all. So I applied to go on MasterChef back in 2009, and in 2010 I made it through to the final. On the back of that, I opened my first restaurant, which was a very traditional pub in the English countryside, just outside of Cambridge. And I was there for 6 years, and I had a wonderful time. But it was a very traditional kitchen. It was a very traditional menu, very protein-driven, lots and lots of meat, lots and lots of fish, with a couple of vegetarian dishes that were almost an afterthought, really. And I came out. I sort of, when I closed the pub after 6 years, I was burnt out. I was burnt out by the whole process of running a restaurant, working in a kitchen for 80 hours a week, and it's a stressful environment. And I had a little bit of time out. I worked abroad. And rested, sort of recuperated, and decided what I wanted from my next project. I wasn't done with cooking. I still wanted to cook. I still wanted to work in hospitality. But I wanted to do it in a much more sustainable, a much more ethical, and a much more, in a way that just suited me and my lifestyle better, that I knew I could sustain for a longer period than 6 years. So I came up with the idea for a restaurant that removed as many of the variables as possible, which is what I think for me made the hospitality business very difficult, was not knowing how many people were going to come through the door, what they were going to order, or what they were going to spend, how much they were going to spend. So my concept was, is it possible to create a restaurant that removes those variables, that can operate in a sustainable fashion, both in terms of the ethics of the business and in terms of the environmental impact that a restaurant business has? So that was the starting point. And after a few sort of weeks and months of putting numbers into spreadsheets and pulling business plans together, this was the concept. So the menu is entirely vegetable focused. There's no meat or fish on the menu. We've been operating that way for over 5 years. We take prepaid reservations, so we eliminate the problem of no-shows. We know exactly how much food to cook, so we eliminate the problem of waste. And by focusing entirely on plants, we have a much smaller environmental impact on what we do. So secondary to all that, when people talk about sustainability, they often think about the environmental concerns that everybody has. But I think there's also personal well-being concerns for mental health and physical well-being as well. So we limit the hours of operation. We do 4 services a week. We have a small core team. Everybody works the same days. Everybody has weekends off. And in terms of the number of hours that people work, we're operating at a much more reasonable level, and a level that I believe restaurants should strive to operate at. So there's no exploitation. It's a very supportive, positive environment, and it's had an enormously positive impact, not just on me and the team that I work with, but also on the customers, and rewriting people's ideas of what a restaurant business should and can be in the 21st century. The pandemic was. We had to move very, very quickly with the COVID pandemic. We'd been open a year to the day when we had to shut the doors. We had to pivot incredibly quickly. So within less than a week, we'd transformed the business from being one that operated as a 10-course relaxed fine dining restaurant to one that was doing takeout. So the business model allowed us to move incredibly quickly. The reservations platform that we use, TOC, also allowed us to move very, very quickly. They rolled out a beta version of some software that they'd been testing already, and honestly, within like 3 days, we could have been operational as a takeout business, and that sustained us. That sustained us for 15 months whilst we couldn't open the doors for in-person dining. It had a huge impact on what we do. In terms of the approach to hospitality, it didn't change what we were doing a great deal because the restaurant was set up with those ideals in mind anyway, and we'd operated for a full year before we had to close the doors. So when it was finally time to reopen in summer 2021, we did so with the same operating principles that we'd opened in 2019, just with a slightly larger space between the tables, I think. Since day one, I've been really, really happy that people sort of haven't really noticed the fact that there's no meat or fish on the menu, which means for me that I think I'm doing my job properly as a cook. And it was only when they looked back at the menu and they looked at what they'd had over the course of the 9 or 10 courses, did they realize that there hadn't been any meat or fish on it. And that's something that I've been really keen to focus on, and not actually making a big deal of it. To me, coming to a restaurant is about a whole experience. It's an experiential few hours that people have here, and if I can take them out of their world for 2.5, 3 hours, then it's great, and they don't have to think too much about what they're eating other than the fact that it's delicious, and then be reflective after the fact that the meal that they'd had, the 3 dozen elements that they've eaten, didn't rely at any point on animal protein or on minimal animal products, and had been completely delicious. That's the hope, but had been made entirely from plants. I think that's really exciting. And the response I've had from customers over the last 5 years has been incredible. Cambridge is a progressive town. It's a forward-thinking city. We have an incredibly loyal customer base, which I'm enormously grateful for. And seeing the same faces come back 3-4 times a year to see what we're doing through the different seasons is amazing. And one of the reasons I have an open kitchen is so I can have those interactions, so that I can see the response of the diners, and so that I can have conversations with them before, during, and after their meal to see what the response is. And having spent many years behind a swing door and not having that connection with the diners, I think having this completely open kitchen to the dining room is a really important aspect of the dining experience here at Van der Lyle. This is something that I do think about, and I don't ever want to be dogmatic. I don't ever want to be preachy with it. First and foremost, I want people to come to the restaurant and have an amazing experience. If it provokes conversation, then I'm always willing to have that conversation. For me, what's important is that I make personal connections with my suppliers, that I make personal connections with the people that I work with, and then tell these stories if people want to hear them, if people want to engage. And in that sense, I suppose there is some sort of responsibility to think about what we're doing in the kitchen and what's going on the plate. But it's never something that I'm going to force onto people, because I don't think that being sanctimonious with it coincides particularly well with offering an experience, and offering an experience in which people want to remove themselves from the outside world for a few hours, and they want to. I think a lot of people come to eat because they want to forget about what's happening out there and just enjoy some delicious food. But like I said, if people want to have that conversation, then it's important to be able to engage, and to be able to do that, you have to have relationships with the suppliers, with the growers, with the farmers, and with the team that work here. For me, it's a two-way street, and I very much enjoy having those conversations if people want to have them. Yeah, I work very closely in particular with 2 local farmers, one of which has a farm about a mile away from the restaurant, and the other 8 or 9 miles away from the restaurant. So locality is amazing. I get produce lists and growing lists, so I know usually sort of 3 to 6 months in advance what will be coming through the doors of the kitchen, depending on what the weather does. It's all highly dependent on how much rain or how much sunshine we have, or in the case of sunshine, don't have at the moment. So the dishes, the menu, it begins in the field. It begins with the growers and with the farmers. Then my job as a chef is to decide how far down the road I take the food. So I try and think of dishes as either being produce-led or process-led, and there's a line between those two, and it's my job as a chef to decide how far down that line and how far in each direction I take a dish. So there's a sort of, I suppose, the Italian or the Californian approach, which is very much let the produce do the work for you and allow the work of the farmer and of Mother Nature to shine through on the plate. And then there's the more classical French approach, which is more chef-focused and more about the work that goes into it in the kitchen. So every time I'm thinking about a dish, I'm thinking about how to balance those two things, both within the dish itself and on that dish's place on the menu. If we have too many processed-driven dishes on the menu, it becomes too arduous for the kitchen. And if we have too many produce-driven dishes on the menu, then I feel like the diner might feel shortchanged a little. And a plate of asparagus is delicious, but a plate of steamed asparagus is something that someone can cook in their own kitchen. So it's my job as a chef to decide how far to take dishes and how far to take produce. So it's a number of different factors that I have to take into account, and one of those is the produce that's coming into the kitchen. One of those is time. One of those is the structure of the menu itself, because as well as each dish having to be balanced, the menu also has to be balanced in terms of the number of hot dishes, the number of cold dishes, the ebb and the flow of the menu. So these are all things that are going on in my head when I'm coming up with dishes, and trying to create a menu. But what I've loved, I think, more than anything about cooking a vegetable-focused menu over the last few years is sort of having to relearn those processes and not being able to hook a dish or a menu on a single hero ingredient, and instead having to think more closely about the process that we can go through to make it more delicious. When I have new chefs in the kitchen, I always talk about how vegetables are they're predominantly water, right? And water doesn't taste of a great deal. So a lot of the process that we go through is about removing water and either replacing it with something more delicious or concentrating the flavor inherent in the produce that we have. And that often forms the crux of where we take dishes and where we take the menu. So there's about 3 months of the year here in the UK when getting hold of produce, fresh produce, particularly locally grown produce, is a real challenge. And actually the winter months aren't too bad. Sort of October, November, December, even January can be okay depending on how cold it is. We still can have some salads heading there. It's early spring and late winter that are the real challenge. So we call that the hungry gap. And we're just coming out of the hungry gap now. And the first signs of that are wild garlic starting to appear, and asparagus gets into season, and morel mushrooms come into season. But as a chef, we have various tactics to try and make the best of the produce that we have. So we rely a lot on root vegetables, which grow and store well through the winter months. We use a lot of squashes, which are harvested late in the autumn, but once they're cured, they can hold for 4, 5, 6 months. So we use a lot of squashes. And then there's the things that we can do in the kitchen to preserve the produce of late summer and autumn, things like fermenting and pickling and freezing. In fact, I think freezing is something that isn't often talked about in professional kitchens, but we can make big batches of things and freeze them down and give us access to things that we can use during the months when getting hold of fresh produce is a little bit more difficult. But one of the things that I think is great about cooking in the cold months is that people expect bigger flavors and they expect bolder flavors and they don't expect freshness. So it's not an onus on the kitchen to create dishes that are necessarily super fresh and super zingy and exciting. People want to be comforted. People want food that makes them feel happy. They want food that sort of nourishes the soul as well as the body. And I think cooking with winter produce is a really good way to tick that box. So I've been cooking professionally for nearly 15 years. I still find it exciting. I still love talking to suppliers. I still get a little buzz when something new comes into the kitchen, and I think about how we can utilize it, make it tasty, make it delicious. And I love the hospitality business as well. I love interacting with customers. Essentially, I'm so lucky. I get to have a dinner party 4 nights a week for. I get to do my hobby. I get to cook, and I get to share my food and my love of food and my passion for cooking with 100 or so people a week, and it's the most rewarding thing I can think of. I love the process of creativity. What makes me very happy is being able to get to the end of the day and being able to say, I know exactly what I did today. I made this, I cooked this, I hosted 24, 25, 26 people in my restaurant. And that's a really special feeling. That is something that I feel very, very grateful for, that I get to do that day in, day out. This is an incredibly exciting time to be at the forefront of plant-forward, vegetable-focused, sustainable cookery. It's such a young art form, and seeing people embrace it, seeing chefs embrace it, and seeing customers and diners embrace it at the same time, it gives me hope, and it makes me think that the future of hospitality and cooking is incredibly exciting. It's a wonderful place to be. It's a wonderful space in which to cook. I feel very fortunate to be here.